Hello everyone, Void here coming back at you all again for another top 10 Commander video. This is probably my favorite month of the year. I just love fall, I love October, and there's a lot of reasons why. I love baseball playoffs, I love Halloween, good TV shows start to come on again, so I want to try to do some more Halloween themed videos. I'm going to do the top 10 vampires in the Commander format. Vampires are really good, they're very powerful, and very rarely do we ever get a set where we don't have a vampire. I think Throne of Eldraine might have been one of those sets. So they're one of the more common creature types, and they've just been given a ton of support in Commander. We of course have the Vampire Commander deck from 2017, nothing but tribal support for vampires. So number 10 is Bloodline Keeper, pretty much one of the only pure vampire tribal cards on the list. There's one more, but he's just perfect for vampires because he gets you more vampires. You can transform him into Lord of Lineage, so all of your vampires become even more powerful, and you still have the ability to create more vampires, making him all around pretty useful for that kind of strategy. Only number 10 because very specific to vampire tribal. Not to say he's the worst card that you can fit into a non-vampire deck, but it just seems like if you're not going to take advantage of the fact that Vampire Tribal makes it easier to transform them, it would feel like a loss. Number 9 is Geleva, Nefalious Scourge. So not really much of a vampire synergy. She's just a Grixis-colored vampire. It's more of like a spell slinger. So she enters the battlefield, and the cool thing about this is that these commanders from Commander 2013, they rewarded you for paying more mana to play them. So if you had to spend a high commander tax just to replay her, you get more cards off the top of everybody's library. Whenever she attacks, you can cast an instant or sorcery from among those cards without paying its mana cost, making her a pretty decent option if you want to build a more competitive deck. Anytime you can get a free casting of an instant or sorcery, it's going to make it easier to go off if you have like a storm strategy. So pretty powerful commander, even though she's not my personal favorite from the deck. I love me some Nekasar. Number 8 is Kalitas, Trader of Get. Now this is the second version of Kalitas, and arguably the best. Now whenever a non-token creature your opponent's control dies, it exiles instead, and you get a 2/2 black zombie. You can pay 3 mana, sacrifice another vampire or zombie to put 2+1/+1 counters on Kalitas. Second ability is okay, but really exiling your opponent's creatures when they would die, so instead of them going to the graveyard, they get exiled and you get a 2/2 zombie, is incredibly powerful. So many decks are shut down by something like this. It's one of the most underrated cards that I think you can play in Commander. Graveyard decks have only become more and more powerful. It's just a strategy that's incredibly reliable, allowing you to recover. If you take away your opponent's ability to recover, you can keep them down, you can limit their card advantage, keep them from getting cards back to their hand. Just a really cool card. Number 7 is Elenda the Dusk Rose. Now she is a creature who's gotten a lot more powerful as a commander option since they changed the ruling about commanders going to the command zone. Even if she goes to the command zone, you're going to get all of those vampire tokens as if she wasn't your commander and just went to the graveyard. I think she is incredibly powerful as a commander option because of that, and an underrated option to go for if you want to try out Vampire Tribal, because what's better in a tribal deck than just getting a ton of 1/1 tokens that are all the same creature type? Makes it perfect for tribal specific cards like Coat of Arms. Really ridiculous card. I think if you can double death triggers, she's obviously even more powerful. There's combos now. Better believe that Phyrexian Altar, Ashnod's Altar are going to be even more powerful because of that. Just a fun card. Number 6 is Angie Falconwrath. Really deserving of this list, even though I don't necessarily think she's that powerful. But being the first real commander to take advantage of madness in a way that makes it fun, in a way that can make it powerful, by giving yourself a card draw engine and a creature that can continue to untap, I think is just pretty cool. She's definitely one of the cooler commanders from Commander 2019. One of the things that I really appreciated about that set was that you took keywords like morph, flashback, and added synergy. So you could make an actual commander deck that felt like it was all going to fit together pretty well. And again, here we have another commander option that doesn't really have to do with vampires at all, other than just being a vampire herself. But a card draw engine in anything is typically going to be pretty strong. Just an interesting option. I think you have something that can enable madness in a way that not many other cards can. She can untap herself, so you can use even more madness costs. And number 5 is Yugenie Undying Partisan. Sacrifice outlets are incredibly powerful in Commander because exiling removal exists. Also, death triggers are pretty important, and you want to get those without having to pay any mana to sacrifice, and Yugenie is a free sack outlet. On top of that, he's also pretty difficult to deal with because you can just sack a creature and he becomes indestructible until end of turn. What's even better is that he does have haste and can get a +1/+1 counter for whenever a creature an opponent controls dies. So, if you do want to make a commander deck around Yugenie, just play nothing but Damnation, board wipes, and black, and you have a real commander damage threat. But in all honesty, I think Yugenie is best as one of the 99. And number 4 is Butcher of Malakir. This card has been around for quite some time, and it's seen a ton of play in Commander. It's still one of the best vampires. We've seen a ton of new ones since, and yes, Butcher of Malakir, 7 mana Grave Pact creature. Because it's a creature, it's easier to get back from the graveyard than an enchantment. It's easier to abuse like that, while also being incredibly punishing, as Grave Pacts tend to be. If there's any kind of removal that you would want to deal with the problem board, it's sacrifice removal, because it doesn't target, and your opponents will have to sacrifice their creatures. There are very few things that can get around sacrificing. It's usually preferred because most opponents have cards like Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, where normal targeted removal can't deal with it. And most board wipes are a one-time use. So if you have a sack outlet like a Yugenie and a bunch of disposable creatures, feel free to sacrifice them, trigger Butcher of Malakir, and make your opponents sacrifice all of their creatures. It's one of the most expensive creatures on this list, but you better believe it's worth all of that 7 mana. Number 2 is Edgar Markov, the other vampire-specific card on the list, and yes, it is this high. Edgar Markov helped take vampires to the next level, and for that he is higher on my list, even though he is specific. Before this, the best vampire commander was arguably what? Olivia Valderin? So you can imagine how much more powerful vampires got by adding white, and also just more speed in general. His Eminence trigger is one of the best, giving you a vampire token every time you play another vampire. On top of that, he has haste himself, and whenever he attacks, all of your vampires are getting +1/+1 counters. So really just to help you out with what is likely going to be a more aggressive deck anyway, with cheaper creatures that have smaller power and toughness, being able to attack quickly, being able to attack with more creatures, and being able to put more counters on those creatures means you're going to hold your own in combat. So Edgar Markov, definitely one of the coolest vampire commanders you can play with. And number 2 is Viscera Seer. We talked about sack outlets with Yugenie. Viscera Seer is better because it's a turn 1 play. And a 1 mana creature is always going to be better than a 3 mana creature if they serve the same exact purpose. Because it means if your combo requires a sack outlet, you only have to have the 1 black mana to do it. It's still free to sacrifice, you don't have to pay any mana. And this time you actually get something that could help you out. You get to scry. So if you're really having problems getting to the cards you need, just sacrifice a bunch of creatures and scry until you get to the card that you want. Viscera Seer, obviously, like a lot of other cards on this list, is not just useful in a vampire deck. I mean, this and number 1 are just 2 creatures that see play consistently in black. So before I get to number 1, we have some honorable mentions here. We have some of these aristocrat vampires. So Cruel Celebrant, Falconwrath Noble, and Vindictive Vampire. Your opponents are going to lose life, and you're going to gain life for whenever a creature dies. It could be your creature, your opponent's creatures. This is also why vampires can be pretty strong too. It's not just for combat with Edgar Markov, but there's a lot of powerful life gain strategies. And if you have the combos, these can win you the game pretty easily. We have Twilight Prophet, a card I recommend for card advantage. You do have to have the City's Blessing. It's just nice to get the Dark Confidant ability, but this time it doesn't punish you, it actually punishes your opponents and gains you life. We have Nirkana Revenant, which is pretty much a 6 mana Cryptghast. It does have a Shade ability, which is pretty cool. If you have nothing else, you can deal some serious damage with it, but not something I often find myself wanting for a vampire deck. And I always want to recommend at least one underrated commander option. So for vampires, you can't really go wrong with Lucia Sanguine Tribune. If you want to play with lifelink vampires, she's pretty good for that. Just a life gain strategy in general in Mardu colors is pretty unique. Alright, so for number 1, you probably saw this coming a mile away, but Blood Artist is easily the best vampire in the commander format. Why? Well, because its triggers for each creature, not just yours. So something like Zulaport Cutthroat, while it's still good, it requires you to have a decent amount of creatures in order for it to be powerful. Now, Falcon Wrath Noble is good, but for the same reason why I like Viscera Seer more than Yugenie, I like Blood Artist more than Falcon Wrath. If I don't have to spend the 2 mana more to effectively have the same thing, I'm not going to do it. And while I've played many decks where I use both, there is pretty much no chance that I'm going to play Falcon Wrath and not have Blood Artist. So anyway guys, let me know what you think about vampires in Commander. They're one of the more powerful creature types now. They just have a ton of support, ton of good creatures. You all have a wonderful day. Void here signing off. See you all next time.